sorry, it's Psalm 18. That sounds better. So you get Psalm 18. We want to, very quickly, there's just a hint, just a small portion of thought that we want to grasp. We've been on this psalm for a few weeks now. I just want to kind of wrap it up as quick as I can this evening. Hit those last couple of questions within the worksheet you have there, and maybe some final thoughts about this particular psalm, and then let's move on into Psalm 60 tonight in our study of the psalm, which is lesson 8. This is lesson 8, and we'll move into lesson 9 then after that. This is a larger psalm. It has kind of a multitude of thoughts that come through it, depending on which section you're looking at. And David talks about various things. He talks about praising God and honoring Him. He speaks of God as a refuge and a rock and a Savior. He talks about the challenges that folks had brought to him. And this psalm is written in what period historically in relationship to David? After what had happened? Okay, so over all of those challenges and difficulties that he had experienced for quite a while, finally aside, and he has some respite, if you will, from that, and the challenges that come from it. There's an interesting statement. If you jump down to verse 43 of Psalm 18, that's what I want to pick up at, and it's question number 7 if you're looking at your question sheets. But in Psalm 18, in verse 43, there's a statement made there in that particular passage, or that particular verse, when he says, "Thou hast delivered me from the strivings of the people, and thou hast made me the head of the heathen, the people whom I have not known, they shall serve me." And the question that the writer of the worksheets asked simply was this: to what does David refer in verse 43? What's he talking about there? Okay, he's going to come into this new kingship. He's going to receive the benefits of Israel and the power that comes with that. What else is he discussing there, though? Okay, and so he basically makes a statement that his kingship is not only going to include his role and sovereignty over God's people and God's heritage, but that it's also going to extend to the nations round about. That he's actually also going to have some authority upon other nations. Some translations use the word heathen nations at times. And that he's going to extend his power beyond the scope of just Israel, but also it will be reaching into those other nations. And curiously, if he's going to become the ruler over all of Israel, who would that include? Thinking about this particular psalm. Okay, it's all these people that had supported Saul for a period of time, and unless they are killed, then they're now either going to have to become subjects of David, or else cause problems for David. That's Psalm 60. We'll talk about that here in just a few moments. But there's an interesting kind of dynamic. David becomes ruler over those who want him to rule. David becomes ruler over those who were supporters of Saul. David becomes ruler and king even over other nations round about, as he's a very conquering kind of king for a period of time. And so he said in verse 44, "As soon as they hear of me, they shall obey me. The strangers shall submit themselves unto me." Will David have to fight a battle to get all these folks to be subject to him? I use the word all, and that's what I'm trying to think about. What's this text say? That some people will subject themselves to him based on solely what? His reputation. The text says that some will hear of me, and they shall obey me. The stranger shall submit themselves to me. Absolutely, David will have to go to battle against a lot of folks. There are going to be those who are going to try to take advantage of the moment. Again, that's Psalm 60. We'll talk about that more later. But there are going to be those who are going to try to take advantage of this transitional moment. There'll be a lot of battles that David has to fight. And in fact, some of them, God kind of is frustrated with in some ways. Next psalm. And here's this moment in this particular psalm, though, where he just mentions the fact that some folks, based on what they hear about David, will subject themselves to him. No, you're going to handfuls of folks. limited battles in some circumstances. It's all varies depending on which particular nation you're dealing with. And you'll see that in the future. You see that even as David kind of comes into his own relationship to his leadership, that he owes a lot of people because a lot of folks, protected him. Some folks were involved in protecting his family. There's a lot of folks that he's a little bit beholden to, and so some of that will come into to play as well. The writer asks the question: who is the violent man listed in this text? Okay, I think you're probably dealing with Saul in specific, potentially. Who else may be? Okay, it might be some other enemy.
It could be anyone that had that same attitude toward David. It could be the violent man, or other versions, man of violence.
And had there been a lot of violence? Yeah. In Saul's pursuit, there's a lot of violence in its wake. It may very well, Saul kind of becomes the poster child, if you will, for all things challenging David. If you were to ask just a very generic way, what's challenging David? The first thought to your mind is Saul. Saul's challenging David. But there's a lot of violent men that are also enemies of David. And for a variety of reasons they chose to be. And so he may have somebody specific in mind like Saul, but it may also just be a generic kind of thought that all those who have been the enemies and pursuers and challengers of David along the path. There was an interesting question he asked, and it'd be interesting to hear what you may have come up with. He said, where in the New Testament is this psalm quoted? Okay, let's take a quick look here at both of those. You said Acts 4:31. Let's take a look at that. That's not something I had jotted down in my notes, not the best. Acts 4:31. When they had prayed, the place was shaken, for they were assembled together, and they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and they spake the word of God with boldness. Are you talking there about the veracity of God and the fierceness of God? Was that the connection you were trying to make to this song? So there is a parallel between what's happening there, at least in terms of showing the power of God, when the Holy Spirit's revealed in that text. Any other passages you thought of? I heard the other. Colossians 5:12 or Revelation 5:12. Let's take a quick look. Yeah, I've got that down. That's the only one I can know. Yeah, that's parallel. Revelation 5:12 saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom, strength, honor, glory, and blessing. Again, if you're talking about just comparative language, then I see that in relationship to the kinds of language that's used in Psalm 18, verse 3 to 12. Yeah. And so there are going to be lots of similarity kind of thoughts that you might see in relationship to that. Let me go to the Romans 15 passage, though, because that's kind of where I ended up in relationship to this particular question. Romans 15 and in verse 9. Is that what you said, Diane? That's what I've got in my notes. He said, and that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy, as it is written, for this cause I will confess to thee among the Gentiles and sing unto thy name. And so that is some similar language again that may have some correlation to this particular psalm. Did anybody else come up with anything else? I'll get to what I'm driving at here in a minute. I just want to give you a chance.
How about Hebrews 2:13?
Okay. Hebrews 2:13. Hebrews 2:13. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I am the children which God hath given me. And so certainly that language is very clear in the Psalm 18 about David trusting in God and putting his faith and confidence in any other passages that you may have seen. Okay, why I asked that, and I'm trying to give you a chance, is because I had trouble figuring out why that question was asked. I didn't really find anything where I could see a very, very specific finite where I could say, wow, yeah, that's just laying the two beside each other. There are some parallels, there's some symbols that are similar, language that is similar. I didn't particularly find a specific passage that just jumped off the page and said, yeah, that's almost a verbatim quote, unless I missed something, and that's why I'm giving you a chance to maybe help you find something I missed. Right. Yep. And the praise language that he offers there, and challenging the Gentiles in the New Testament moment to do that. There's parallel thoughts, and I guess the point maybe was simply to illustrate that you do see, and this seems like to me just an odd song to try to make that parallel, but there are lots of references to specifically to the Psalms within the New Testament writings. Anything else? I'm opening it up to you because this question kept having stuff in terms of why we did this song with that question. Sounds like a big critical trial. Okay, and what great blessing does David have in his view in verse 49 and 50? Back to Psalm 18. So longevity, to the rain, therefore will I give thanks unto thee, O Lord, among the heathen, and sing praises unto thy name. There's that language that we see there in Romans about the heathen or the Gentiles and singing praises among that Gentile world. And so there's definitely a parallel there. Great deliverance giveth he to his king, and showeth mercy to his anointed, to David, and to his seed forever. More. And so David not only sees victory over Saul, but he sees the ultimate fruition of him coming into power and his lineage being linked to the throne from that point forward. And when you think about it, who in the time of Jesus, fast forward quite a ways, who were the Jews at that point in time referencing, if you reference the greatest of kings? It was always David. David was one that, so in that sense, his name is forever linked to that heritage. They don't think they weren't singing the praises of Saul in the days of the New Testament. They weren't even in some way singing the praises of Solomon, the great temple builder, and this one who had great prestige and relationship to other nations around about him. But they pointed back to David. His name is still, even to this day, recalled among that nation of people. And so David foresees the great blessing of that kind of longevity in relationship, in permanent connection to the heritage of God.
I think he's referring here to the promise that it was made of God in 7:7, verse 1 to 17, about his seed would rule forever.
Right. And the promises to David, sometimes we've been so far removed from that in some senses historically at this stage that we forget that they were very specific to him. Not just you're going to be king someday, but that you're the one that's going to carry this forward. The great seed promises ultimately link back to eventually up to Christ. You're very specifically part of that, David. You're very specifically part of that history. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, I think the nation as a whole between the existing monarch, Saul, and his nemesis, David. And that I would have to conclude that the nation as a whole would have understood that if anything happened to Saul, that David is going to receive the throne. Are there going to be those who try to stop that? Yeah, and we'll see that in future studies. But I would have to venture to understand that the nation as a whole is very familiar. You don't fight all these battles, and you've got Saul troops all over the place. That knowledge of those events were going on among the people. So I think there was probably definitely an understanding among them about David's eventual role if he conceived Saul.
Basically, when the king comes into town, two ways. One by genealogy, and the other by God anointing him. David was anointed on Saul. Solomon was the son of David, which he wasn't anointed like that. But in the anointing David, he has a covenant with God as well. We'll see. And I think that's what Paul did. He confirmed.
Sure. And all that covenant we execute to what God's promises are. And some of that would have been understood as well, I think, among the people. How God had chosen David for these purposes. Obviously, his work even before these moments of Saul pursuing him. You remember, it kind of what got all this started. David has killed his 10,000s while Saul has killed his thousands. And Saul's jealousy begins to rage even early on. And so I think the people were pretty much aware of what was on the horizon. Anything else before I move forward into our next study? I didn't mean to leave. I was hoping not to leave anything hanging last week, but I just couldn't get done.
I did know, Brian, Solomon came through the lineage of David, of course, as God had promised. But he was also anointed by one of God's prophets as the king.
Yeah, because there was that conflict
Right.
where you got one set of guys over here trying to anoint them, and so God brings the prophet into the mix. So there, yeah, and so let's not negate the idea that as if God was completely removed from it. I don't think that's what Paul is saying. Just you've got a completely with Saul today, you've got a complete family disconnect, and that happened because God chose David over the lineage of Saul. Solomon ends up there because God allows for him and anoints him to be so because he's David's son. So there is just some slight difference between those two moments. Okay. Go to Psalm 60. Flip to lesson 9 and go to Psalm 60. Because really, these two Psalms are they're connected historically. Because one happens right on the heels. Psalm 18 is written right on the heels of this victory over Saul. This new fresh approach. I'm finally going to get to rule. Other nations are going to be subject to me. All that's because of God's doing, giving God all the credit. But what happens is that the transition from Saul to David, for lack of a better description, isn't nearly as smooth as maybe David had hoped. And there are a lot of difficulties and challenges and hurdles and problems that you have to overcome. Some Saul caused, and by the very nature of the idea that you just inherited Saul's kingdom, you just inherited his problems. And any problem that Saul had with another nation now becomes David's problem with another nation. And David's got internal issues. And there's just lots of folks creating challenges. He gave you, in the worksheet, he gave you lengthy text. The 1 Chronicles 17:16, all the way through chapter 19 and verse 19. 2 Samuel chapter 3 and 4, also chapter 21, 1 through 14. I'm not going to take the time in our class to read all of that. What do those texts tell us about? Try to sum it up in maybe a sentence or two. Okay, which we already those passages are about David having to deal with the challenges, and there seems to be anytime anytime you've got transitional government, especially in that circumstance, power's up for grabs. And anytime power's up for grabs, how many hands do you have in the pot? A bunch, right? Right? Any time you think about our own governmental system, any time that people think there are favorable odds of a certain party getting into power, notice how there's 62 guys that want to run for that office. Anytime there's a negligible, very small percentage that they're going to be able to assume the power, not very many guys are interested. It's power grab. Guess what's going on in David's world right after Saul dies and he's trying to establish himself as king? It's power grab everywhere. There's power grab within Saul's family. Not just his family in specific, but people who had served Saul. A fellow by the name of, you recall, there's one son, Ishbosheth, and there was a mighty man of Saul's that kind of was involved with Ishbosheth as well. Who was that, if you read those texts? Abner, right? You got Abner involved in that circumstance as well. And Ishbosheth gets mad at Abner about some things that Abner had done in relationship to Saul's concubine. You get all that history with that. Abner thinks he can make a power grab here and maybe at least snag a portion of the kingdom, if not all of it, out of the hands of David. There's just a lot going on. You have difficulties with even Joab. Joab becomes whom to David? Is what? Right? Becomes his military leader, right? Joab becomes military leader to David. But there's a circumstance where Joab's upset about Abner, right? Because Abner had done what? That's right. He had been involved, but specifically Joab's got an issue with Abner because Abner had killed Joab's brother. And Abner comes down, they acts like they're buddies with David. David doesn't, he decides, I'm not going to fight this battle. I'm going to release Abner. He lets him go. Joab hears about it, throws a fit, for lack of a better description. Runs and tells Abner, no, the king needs to see you again. You need to come back. And they kind of get him off in a corner. And what's Joab do when he gets him off by himself? Kills it. David said it's a shame that Abner died as a what? I remember? As a fool. As a fool dies. That here's Abner, and he gets conned by Joab into coming back. Oh, come on over here. I got something to tell you about. And here's the message. Well, there may have been. You see some of the conversations he has with Ishbosheth and how he wants to handle, David's transitional moments. There probably was some legitimacy to David and Abner's circumstance and hopes to maybe calm some of the storm. Joab didn't want to obviously any part of that. But so just trying to refresh you a little bit about the history. That's what's going on. It wasn't. David walks back in to the city of Jerusalem. There's a grand party and everything is happily ever after. David's got a long, long road before he's able to get the nation to where he wants it to be. So that's all internal. What else has he got going on? External, right? Who are the... Okay, so he's got, if you look at this map, you've got all these different areas. They're specifically mentioned in Psalm 18. There's big long names up here at the top of our map. They see Aram, Zobah, and those areas that were causing David some difficulty. Here's generally in pink at the center of your screen. This area here is generally is Israel. Here's Jerusalem in that picture that you're seeing on your map. You've got problem with the Edomites down here to the south. You've got problems in Moab. There's just challenges everywhere. Over here, folks that always seem to be a thorn in somebody's side. There's the Philistines over there over by the sea. And so David's got plenty of issues among his own. And he's got outside influences and challenges that he's having to deal with as well. That's the background to Psalm 6. That's the basic turmoil of a nation in transition. Men hungry for power, both external nations and those within Israel. Everybody's trying to find their way here and see how it all shakes out at the end of the day. That's what's happening. Nations round about, should we obey David or should we fight? People within, should I accept David's rule or should maybe I grab what power I can while I can? That's what's happening when he writes these words. O God, thou hast cast us off. Thou hast scattered us. Thou hast been displeased. O turn thyself to us again. Thou hast made the earth to tremble. Thou hast broken it. Heal the breaches thereof, for it shaketh. Thou hast showed thy people hard things. Thou hast made us to drink the wine of astonishment. Thou hast given a banner to them that fear thee, that it may be displayed because of the truth. Thy beloved may be delivered. Save with thy right hand, and hear me. God hath spoken in his holiness. I will rejoice. I will divide Shechem and mete out the valley of Succoth. Gilead is mine, and Manasseh is mine. Ephraim also is the strength of mine head. Judah is my lawgiver. Moab is my washpot. Over Edom will I cast out my shoes. Philistia, triumph thou because of me. Who will bring me into the strong city? Who will lead me into Edom? Will not thou, O God, which hast cut us off, and thou, O God, which didst not go out with our armies, give us help from trouble, for vain is the help of man. Through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies. Basically, David makes a statement about the people and their connection to God at this moment, and what is it? What is their relationship with God when he reads these words? It's strange. What's the kind of language that he uses in the text? They've been what? Cast off. We've been cast off, left without God. In the latter part of that text, he talks about the idea: why have you cast us off? Why will you not go out with us against the armies? Anytime that they received the victory, why were they victorious? Because of God's help. Did David generically, I almost want to say always, but as a whole, does David basically accept that fact? Victorious meant God was with them. Yes. And so what's his mind thinking? If they've lost some battles and some things aren't going so well, God's not with us. Okay, if things have been good, God must have been with us. Things aren't so good right now, so we've done something's wrong. Something's wrong with the relationship. If things were going well for a period of time, but now they're not, something's wrong with the relationship. So this psalm is an appeal before God. What's happening here? Why have we been cast off? And he's kind of sorting through it and trying to acknowledge certain choices and decisions maybe along the way that maybe had caused them to be cast off.
One of the reasons that Ryan was in the background reading was the problem with the Gibeonites. And David had to deal with that. Because of that problem, there was a famine that had come upon them, and they needed to deal with this problem and resolve it because God wasn't pleased with all of it.
And that helps us answer question 2. When did God afflict the land of Canaan during the reign of David? And why? In that last text, I believe, in 2 Samuel 21, gives us a clue about that. So, what's that text talk about? Saul. Okay, Saul had done what to whom? Okay, he dealt severely with the Gibeonites. Right. And their foreign nation, what's the big deal?
Long time ago, Joshua.
That's right. In Joshua chapter 9, a covenant had been made in Joshua chapter 9 that the Gibeonites would be protected. Now, they received that covenant based on what? Trickery, right? They kind of acted like they were somebody that they weren't, and they kind of disguised who they were in some senses, and Joshua makes the covenant, and then, says, we'll honor the covenant, but what? You're going to serve us. Okay, we're not going to destroy it like we have been with other nations. We're going to honor the covenant we made. But you just became servants to us. But for some reason along the path, and is there a biblical text that illustrates it to us, by the way, of Saul doing this to the Gibeonites? I could not find, and from everybody I read, nobody seemed to be able to find a biblical text that illustrated this moment where Saul had done this, with the exception of the fact of this text here, where Saul had dealt treacherously with the Edomites, and David is, or the Gibeonites rather, and David is reaping the challenges because of that. And so there is a strength. God sent how long, by the way? 3 years of famine. In the midst of David's reign, because of not dealing with the Gibeonites in the fashion that they should have. Saul had dishonored that original covenant made in Joshua chapter 9. And so, if that's our time frame we're dealing with here, then David certainly understands the idea of being cast off from God and not having the favor of God for a period of time and the difficulties that brings to him. With what was God displeased in Israel at this particular time? And what had God done in his displeasure? What kind of an answer it is? What's he displeased with? There's a approach in there. So take the easy answer. Oh, but there you go. That's the easiest one. God is displeased with all this conflict and your all these battles and all of this violence. And I'm not going to. They're also, remember all that history we talked about 5 minutes ago. It is if some followers of David and even some potentially in powers of influence and position were taking advantage of the good favor of God. Victory after victory after victory, taking power over this nation and that nation, and trying to advantage the good favor of God. They've been on the run, they've been living in caves, and you can kind of see some of them kind of wanting to step out a little bit and say, you know what, hey, now things are going good for us. Let's take advantage of this. And let's grab as much power as we can, and let's try to influence as much as we can. And God says, no, I can cast you off just as quickly as I get in favor. This isn't what I'm about. I'm not about you gaining personal power. I'm not about you becoming reputable among men as somebody who's powerful. The whole point of this is to glorify whom? God. The other nations don't need to know that David and some of his mighty men are great. They need to know that their God is great. And so God says, I'll cast you off. You don't always have the favor of God. Can we be cast off? No. It doesn't. We can make poor decisions and choices. We can take God's blessings for granted. We can use them for selfish ambitions. We can attempt to try to access the power and care of God for personal and selfish purposes, to fill our own bellies. I believe James writes about it. We can be cast off as well. Once in the favor of God does not mean we are always in the favor of God. Once in the wonderful grace and mercy that He extends does not mean I will always reside. Here's David and the people with him. And they had finally received great favor in the eyes of God, and they had gone through a long period of time where David wondered for a long while whether he's going to even live. And the only thing he had was God carrying through those days. God says, now I'm going to bless you and rise you up, but you all behave in this fashion, I can cast you off just as quickly. David started to recognize that. So he writes this psalm, in a sense, apologetically, before the throne of God, that we abused the privileges that you offer to us, and we apologize. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like maybe I ought to do the same. That I probably ought to get down on my knees sometimes and apologize to the Lord granted your blessings. I haven't appreciated them enough. I haven't been thankful enough for them. I've complained or I've hurt, whatever it is. And begin to recognize that God doesn't always have to favor. He doesn't always have to bless me. If I begin to pursue things in fashions that are contrary to His purposes, I can be set aside. Just as quickly.
Constantly have to rebuke these men who think they want to do all the time here with tithes and stuff.
And those guys haven't changed overnight. They did the moment that Saul's destroyed and victory is theirs doesn't mean those guys have changed their disposition about things. They just haven't been empowered, and now you get a transition into that. He said something interesting in verse 3. He said, and this is question 4. He said that they were drunk. Well, that's not exactly what he said. He said they had drank or drunk the wine of, some translations say staggering, some, this King James says astonishment, confusion. Yeah. They were, well, they lost the guidance. They lost the direction and guidance that was coming from God. You tend to stagger around. You don't know, am I supposed to go fight or am I not supposed to go fight? Should we go into battle here or should we not go into battle? But because God says, listen, you all have been making your own choice, go ahead. Go ahead and choose your path. But I'm not going with you. I'm going to walk that path. And so they've reached a point where David recognized we're just staggering around you. God has forced us to drink the wine of astonishment. He's forced us to live in a confused state because we've decided that we've got smarter and better ways than He does. So David writes the Psalm to remind us. You add verse 4 to that, which is question 5. Thou hast given a banner to them that fear Thee, that it may be displayed because of the truth. What's a banner? Okay, what else do we use for a banner? Flag. Okay? What do we call that? Stars and stripes. We call that the Star Spangled Banner, right? Star Spangled Banner. An emblem, an ensign. They're a mark. I was, my brain's going to freeze on me for a second. I was watching something the other day. On the moon, obviously the U.S. flag was the first original. The Soviets, the former Soviet Union, has a flag as well. They landed on the moon. I believe that's the only 2 flags that are there because they were talking about the fact that that's China's big goal right now with their space program. Is they want to land on the moon and stick their flag on it alongside the U.S. flag and Soviet original USSR flag, and they want theirs to be stuck there in the ground of the moon as well. Your banner, your mark. And what David says, thou hast given a banner to them that fear thee, that it may be displayed because of truth. David basically is saying, you've given us a flag that we can mark through territory. And we can say this belongs to God, and this belongs to God, and this belongs to God. But you can only do that according to what? He said at the end of the verse. According to truth. He gives it to those who fear it. And they must display that because of the truth. In other words, they don't get just to decide on their own where God's banner is from. They don't get to decide on their own where the flag of Jehovah is placed. God reveals it. God dictates it. And so David understands that they've been kind of running around, staggering around is his description. They've been staggering around, and you just get the imagery. Here they are, they're staggering around, they're sticking God's banner there, they're sticking God's banner here. They're confused. They don't know where God belongs. They don't know where God comes from. David says it's a privilege to be able to carry the banner of God. Every war movie you've ever watched, right? The flag bearer is hit, and what somebody do? They throw down their weapon, and they grab the banner. They grab the flag. Because they recognize that carrying is in being identified is more important than their own lives. And so they'll throw down and they'll grab that. That's what David's talking about. God has a banner, identified, a marker. God's got a flag. That's the imagery. He gives it to those who respect and fear Him, who will go about and place that flag where God has determined it should go. Now you think of the symbolism pushing forward. They had very literally one. They're a nation both spiritual and physical. We sing a song, I don't know if it's in this book or not, but there's a royal banner given for display to the soldiers up with the cross. In sign fair, we lift it up today. I thought I could remember. But you remember the song. In some ways, who is God's banner?
Sure.
We're God's flag. We don't fly a literal flag out here on the building somewhere. We're the banner, the royal banner, given for display, allowing the world to know that there are people who fear God and honor the truth. And as much honor and prestige and respect that there is when that fallen soldier on the battlefield who's carrying that flag and the next one up grabs it and carries that banner forward, you and I carry the banner of Jesus. We bear His name. We bear it personally in the name Christian. We bear it collectively as a church. That ought to come with a healthy dose of respect, fear, and a love for truth.
A lot of people left the banner and go off.
The personal willingness to identify. Sure. To me, there's lots of poetic pictures here that aren't just parallel to what's going on in the time of David, but they affect us as well. And I couldn't help but think of that flag bearing and how important that is. The display of truth and benefit comes.
One text popped into my mind, Brian, as we were talking about that, is 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 19. You're going to put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
I kind of need to read it.
You go ahead and read what I get there.
It says, nevertheless, the firm foundation of God stands having this seal or this banner. The Lord knows those that are His, and everyone who names the name of the Lord is sustained with victory.
And that's the balance in this, and that's what David's saying. In essence, he's saying we've claimed the banner of God, and we've claimed the right to display it and to demonstrate it where we have chosen. But he says that's not the way it works. God does the choosing. What's he saying in 2 Timothy 2:9? He's saying God determines who are His. God recognizes and knoweth those that are His, and they're identified with those who avoid lawlessness, sin, and those who stand sure in the foundation of the teachings of God. Any other thoughts about that? And in some ways, it seems as though God's saying to them that the power had affected them in a way that they've taken advantage of God, and He's saying no more. No more. It simply cannot occur in that fashion any longer. Any other thoughts about anything up to that stage of the beginning set? We'll pick up, Lord willing, next Wednesday. We'll try to definitely finish. I'll probably stay in this text next